Hello, and welcome to Sanderside's BROTP One-Shots Explained. My name, as you all know me, is Zephina or Zephina the 11, and I'm the author of the Sanderside's BROTP One-Shots, which you can find on Archive of Our Own, Wattpad, fanfiction.net, or Tumblr. I'll have links to those in the description. What I also need to state is that the Explained series is exclusive to Archive of Our Own and Wattpad, which will also be in the description below. And this is probably a really odd concept for me to run with, as I don't think I've ever seen any other fanfic writer explain their stories, and especially not in a visual medium like this. That being said, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's start with a bit of background on who I am and this story. First of all, these videos are not going to be anywhere near as polished as my usual writings are, simply because I'm just trying to convey a lot of this and make it feel a little bit more comfortable than just my normal writings. Warning, I know I tend to talk a bit fast, and my accent can be a bit hard to understand at times, so I'll do my best to kind of amend those issues as we go. At the time of recording, I am actually 19 years old, a high school graduate with a few college English classes under my belt. That being said, I do think that my level of education has helped me to improve with my writing skills, and overall, that's not to say that other writers who are younger than me can't be better than I am. Honestly, there are probably plenty out there who are. But over time, I feel like I've picked up on ways that I can edit and polish my works, more so than what I had in the past when I was younger and writing. That being said, that's a lot of what this series covers, so let's get on with it. We're going to get right in with my first chapter, Saddened Patton, which is the original story that I ever wrote for the Sanderside's fandom. Now, a little bit of background on the stories as a whole and on how I got into this fandom. At the time that this story was written and uploaded, I was watching the Sandersides pretty regularly, but I hadn't gotten involved into the fandom, or the famdom as I've heard we're now called. I didn't know that was the thing until recently. I actually started going on Tumblr to find inspiration for another story when I stumbled across this fandom, and when I realized how docile and kind the fanders were, it was a big inspiration for me to start writing for this fandom because I had gotten so much negative response in other fandoms, and honestly, I was losing a lot of my want to write any of this anymore. Now, when I started writing and when I found out that I wanted to write for this fandom, the Accepting Anxiety videos had just come out. And as many people have probably guessed from reading my stories, I am a major Virgil fan. Major Virgil fan. He's by far my favorite. And so, obviously, he features a lot more in these stories than the others do. But, whatever the case may be, at the time, Accepting Anxiety had just come out, and that was really what drew me into this fandom. Because I'm a sucker for the trope of the villain kind of getting redeemed, and so his redemption arc just drew me in big time. And that's really what pushed me to start writing for this fandom. So on to my inspiration for Saddened Patton. It's actually a bit funny. As of the Accepting Anxiety videos, we got a closer look at how much Virgil respected Patton. And at the time, I think Virgil respected Patton to a higher degree than he did Logan and Roman. And I honestly think that is just because of the way that Patton had treated him up to that point. Obviously, since then, the characters have developed both in canon and in my stories, and so that's important to note as well. Back to the point. I've seen plenty of stories where Patton has stood up in Virgil's defense, some of them even canon. But, and I will explain this a lot through my chapters, I enjoy taking a concept and just turning it around on its head, 180 degrees. So, that meant I wanted Virgil to defend Patton. So, I actually do realize that as of late, some of this has become canon with Virgil being the one to stand up for Patton, and honestly, I love that, but whatever. Back on track. What gave me the final push to actually write this story was a clip that I had seen online of Dan and Phil, in which they were being talked over, and Dan reaches over and grabs the other team's microphone and just says, "Can Phil express an opinion?" and then puts it back. I love that. That is hilarious to me. I thought it was adorable, and it led me to wonder, what if this similar situation were to play out with the sides? Specifically, if Patton was being ignored, and Virgil was the one who had to step in to kind of fix that situation. So that's how the idea for this story came to fruition. So now we're going to get into some of what I think are my overall thoughts on the story Saddened Patton. When I look back at this story, I look back at it with a little bit of disdain, though it's far from my least favorite story, and we'll get to that in time. And the reason for that is, when I went back and read through this again, because I wanted to do this series, I realized how much my skills have changed and developed over time. Now, let me go ahead and say that this by no means makes me a perfect author. I'm actually under the impression that whether you're just starting out or you're at J.K. Rowling or J.R.R. Tolkien levels of writing, there's always room to improve. You're never going to be the perfect writer, but don't let that dissuade you from keeping going, and I'll elaborate more on that in a bit. Anyway, having noticed the experience and that there's always room to improve, I didn't much care for Saddened Patton when I went back to read it for this, and that's for two reasons. The first being, I dislike this story because it's pretty clear that I did not quite have the characterization down for the sides. It was my first story. I think a little bit of that is forgivable. But what really made it bad for me was seeing how much I villainized Logan and Roman, which I never wanted to do. That was not my intention. That's not how I wanted to come across. Of course, I don't see them as villains. But nowadays, I get a lot of comments on my stories, which I always love to read. It makes my day when you guys are like, "Oh, this is so great," or whatever. But, back on topic. I actually get a lot of comments where you all compliment me on my characterization of the sides. And it's hard for me to take compliments sometimes just because I have anxiety and depression, but that's neither here nor there. And that makes this a part of the reason I dislike the story, because of how badly I characterized the sides at the time. And it just doesn't add to the story, and I didn't like it. So that's a little bit of an issue I had. The second reason is actually not because I dislike the story, not because I think it's bad. Yes, I realize it's one of my earliest writings, and therefore is going to be a story that has less skill to it than what I currently upload. But what bothers me is it is the first story that people coming into this series will read. And it doesn't display what I'm really capable of, and I worry that it will turn people away. And I don't want them to think, "Oh, well, this is all this person can do," when I've had over a year and a half to hone in on my skills and get better. And so, especially because of the way I portray Logan and Roman. Like I said earlier, I villainized them, and that was not my intention. And I think that could get people into my series with the wrong idea. And I hate that's the first chapter. Now, I'm going to get into some writing tips that I think I can that will help you guys that are based on this particular chapter. First and foremost, I think it is always constructive to have older works to look back on, which is why I haven't taken this down, and I will never take my stories down, because I think it's good to be able to look back and see how much you've improved. The next one is always double check your writing, and I'll get back to that in a bit because there's a little bit of a funny story that goes along with that one. And next, I cannot stress this enough. Whether you're just starting out writing, whether you've been writing for a few years, I don't care if you're at J.R. Tolkien, J.K. Rowling levels of writing. keep going, keep writing. There's always room for you to improve. There's always room to get better. Don't deny yourself that. Keep going. If you're passionate, keep going. That actually is something that will come up in a later chapter, trust me. Next, and this is one that I've seen a lot, but I'm going to get into it anyway. There are always going to be people who try to hate on your stories. Try to ignore them to the best of your ability. However, constructive criticism is not hate. Now, I have some experience with this one myself, as I often try to give polite constructive criticism because, as I said, I have a few college English classes under my belt. I'm a little bit older than the average person writing in this fandom. Like I said, no hate on younger writers. They can be better at this than I am. But considering that I started around the ages of 11 to 13, and that's where a lot of people are when they first start, I think it can be important for them in a step to improve to receive constructive criticism. Because if they can learn even one thing from that, I feel like it could really help them to improve their stories, and it will become better over time. Now, don't nag. Don't keep going at them for the same thing, because that's not going to get anybody anywhere. Say it once, say what you need to say, and be done. But be polite. Don't hate, don't be mean, say it nicely, and if they respond with hate, ignore it. Just let them delete the comment if they want to, just ignore it. I actually will say this much for constructive criticism. On platforms where it's an ability, try to send a private message. Don't do it publicly, because it can feel like public humiliation to some extent. And I get where that comes from, even if that's not your intent. If it's not possible, leave it in a comment, but try to make the comment brief. Okay. And now for the one that everyone is going to hate me for. Edit, edit, edit. Editing is one of the most important things you can do in a story. I mean, for example, when you draw a picture, how many times do you go back with your eraser and try again? Writing is the same way. You can't just type it all out and be done. I wish it was that simple. It would save me a lot of time, but it's not. And I know from going back and reading my stuff that I miss so much when I go through the first writing process. And going back to edit, and now having a friend who actually helps me edit my stories, who's someone who's really close to me. Again, I'll bring them in later to talk about them. Because in a way, they're sort of the Joan to my Thomas, in a way. Even though I have a friend edit, and I still edit, I miss things. It happens. I'm human. So is my friend. That's just how this works. But as I go, specifically with editing, as these stories continue, I will give more explanation on editing and ways that you can sort of streamline that process, and will help you just get better at it all around. Now, earlier I said always double check your writing, and that there was a funny story around that. I'll tell it. Ironically enough, I did not double check my writing of this chapter before it was uploaded. And that was a little over a year ago, a little over a year and a half ago at this point, and it actually didn't come to my attention until about a month and a half ago that on all of my platforms but one, which was Wattpad, the story was corrupted. The last third of the story got cut for some reason. I, to date, can't figure out what happened, because even my document in my computer was corrupted. I don't know how it got uploaded to Wattpad fully. I mean, I'm glad it did, because I was able to go in and take it from there and put it on the rest of my platforms. But if I had just double-checked my writing, even up to the point that I had posted it, I would have noticed that mistake. And I left it for a year. A year! That would have been a mistake I could have fixed in 15 minutes, and yet, nope, I just left it for a year. I can't imagine how confused you guys must have been without that last third. Goodness me. I apologize for that. Anyways, so I hope you have enjoyed this little thing that's the first chapter of my Sandersides Explained series. Hope you've enjoyed it, and see you next time.